We are here in northwest Iowa at what is called the Iowa Great Lakes. That is Spirit Lake and East and West Okoboji Lakes. The weather is beautiful today, but we're going to take you back to the spring of 1857 when times were a little tougher.
In the spring of 1857, a bitter, harsh winter was just giving way to a spring thaw. But the peace of the Iowa frontier would soon be shattered by violence, tragedy, and a struggle for survival. This is the story of the Spirit Lake Massacre and the unforgettable captivity of a 13-year-old girl named Abbie Gardner.
Welcome to Next Act Retirement and Travel. I'm Bob.
And I'm Sarah.
We are part-time retirees traveling part-time to see as much of the world as we can.
Today we're going to take a look at one of the most haunting and historic sites in the American Midwest, the Abbie Gardner Cabin. Behind these humble wooden walls lies a tale of frontier life, conflict, survival, and resilience. Let's step back to 1857 and uncover the chilling events of the Spirit Lake Massacre.
Sarah, how did the Gardner family come to Spirit Lake?
Good question, Bob. Abbie was the third of 4 children with 2 older sisters and a younger brother. The family was from upstate New York. In 1853, however, her father decided to head west. In Ohio, the family met up with Abbie's older sister who had married, the older sister's husband, and their baby. Gradually, the families headed west, stopping at times for several months or even a whole season before they gathered themselves and headed onward. One of these stays included time spent in Clear Lake, Iowa, where Abbie describes that settlement's first minor conflicts with the Native Americans in the area. To give you some perspective, we'll put up a current map of some of the places mentioned as we go along.
Moving west of Clear Lake, Abbie describes their journey to Spirit Lake like this.
On the route taken, no traces of civilization were discernible west of Algona in Kossuth County, Iowa. The Des Moines River was unabridged, and the sloughs, being filled with water, were frequently impassable. By day, we frequently encountered Indians, and by night we were entertained by the howling of wolves. Still, we went forward.
Finally, on July 16, 1856, they arrived on the shores of Lake Okoboji. Soon, several other men and their families were taking up settlement around the lakes. Within a 50-mile radius, there were a few more families that were establishing their settlement as well. The winter of 1856 to 1857 was extremely harsh, with bitter cold, deep snow, and violent storms.
The Native Americans were also suffering from the harsh weather. Among them was the Wahpekute band of the Sioux Dakota, led by Inkpaduta. Inkpaduta had a number of personal grievances. Some of his family were murdered by settlers for a few years previous, and his band had conflict with the settlers and was being denied resources and annuity payments from the U.S. government due to the band's status or lack of status under the then current treaties. They were starving, desperate, and angry. It was a volatile mix.
In March 1857, Inkpaduta and his band attacked several cabins near Spirit Lake. Over the course of several days, they killed around 33 settlers, men, women, and children. Among the families targeted was the Gardners. The Gardners' cabin is labeled as number 1 on the map that we have up.
In this cabin lived 13-year-old Abbie Gardner with her family. Inkpaduta's band came looking for handouts and food, but soon it turned violent, and without warning, he moved to kill Abbie's family. She watched as her parents, her siblings, and her 2 nephews were killed. She was taken captive.
Abbie described the moment when all had been killed except her.
All this time, I was both speechless and tearless, but now left alone. I begged them to kill me. It seemed as though I could not wait for them to finish their work of death. One of them approached and roughly seized me by the arm and said something I could not understand. But I well knew from their actions that I was to be a captive.
3 other young women were also taken. 2 of them did not survive, but Abbie and another young woman were eventually ransomed.
Years later, Abbie would write her book called History of the Spirit Lake Massacre and the Captivity of Miss Abbie Gardner. I purchased this book on Kindle. The author sets out her story, but also other original source information, including excerpts from those involved in attempting a rescue of those at Spirit Lake and the captives. If you're interested in learning more, I recommend this reading. We will come back to Abbie's story of captivity, but the story of those who attempted to rescue or provide aid to the settlers at Spirit Lake is equally as dramatic. Their nearest government resources were at Fort Dodge, Iowa, and Fort Ridgely in Minnesota. Attempts were made from both directions. Men from Fort Dodge did make it to Spirit Lake, found the dead, and buried them. Travel was extremely difficult. I will let the written account of Major Williams of Fort Dodge to the governor of Iowa tell the story.
We took up our line of march on the 25th of March and proceeded up the west branch of the Des Moines River to intercept the savages, who reports said were about to sweep all the settlements on that river. By forced marches through snowbanks from 15 to 20 feet deep and swollen streams, we forced our way up to the state line, where we learned the Indians embodied 200 or 300 strong at Spirit Lake and Big Island Groves. Never was harder service rendered by any body of men than by those 110 men under my command. We had to ford streams breast deep every few miles, and at all snowbanks or drifts had to shovel roads and draw our wagons through by hand with tug ropes, also the oxen and horses. All were wet all day, up to the middle, at least, and lay out upon the open prairies at night, without tents or other coverings than a blanket or buffalo robe.
At least a part of the men were sent forward to Spirit Lake to search for any survivors and bury the dead. The return trip was even worse, as supplies dwindled and exhaustion rose. Many men returned physically and mentally diminished, and even permanently maimed.
Inkpaduta's band moved north and west into Minnesota. Abbie's life became that of a slave to the native women. Her emotional pain was so deep, she showed no response to threats to kill her. Ironically, this raised her esteem among her captors. Inkpaduta's band was continuously on the move because efforts were being made to find them and bring them to reckoning.
Abbie was on the move with the rest of the band and was often required to carry packs of up to 70 pounds. She survived on what little food was provided to her. Her own clothing wore out and she was dressed in native wear. The native women took to painting her face and her hair part and oiling her hair.
Eventually, some Native Americans, friendly with the settlers, found Inkpaduta's camp and were able to ransom one of Abbie's fellow captives, a Mrs. Marble. Abbie, however, had to continue on alone.
One party from Fort Ridgely were very close to the Indians at one time, but didn't continue to pursue them because Their guides told them that the band was really 2 or 3 days ahead of them. This, however, ended up to be a fortunate circumstance because had the men from Fort Ridgely actually caught up to the band of Indians and attacked them, the Indians would have certainly killed the remaining captives.
Nevertheless, Governor Medary of Minnesota and the Indian agent Charles Flandreau continued to try to pursue the release of young Abbie Gardner. Finally, they had a plan, and working with several Native Americans who were friendly with the settlers, they were able to negotiate for Abbie's release and return. Now hear Abbie describing the negotiations for her freedom.
Councils were held after the usual fashion of the Indians. First, they gathered in and around the teepee where I was, and then they adjourned to the open prairie where they sat in a circle and talked and smoked, and smoked and talked. This was kept up for 3 days, during which I was kept in perfect ignorance of the state of affairs. All this parley and these repeated councils, I subsequently learned, were occasioned by the fact that the council was divided. At last, however, consent was obtained. The price paid for my ransom was 2 horses, 12 blankets, 2 kegs of powder, 20 pounds of tobacco, 32 yards of blue squaw cloth, 37.5 yards of calico and ribbon, and other small articles. The bargain having been agreed to and the price paid, I was at once turned over to the hands of my new purchasers. But so great a business transaction was this that it must be sealed and celebrated by nothing less than a dog feast. A dog feast is the greatest and highest honor that they could have conferred upon us. I was, however, so unappreciative of the honor and had such prejudice against dog soup that I did the unhandsome thing to remain in my tent.
With her purchasers, she traveled more than 7 days without a real understanding of what her new purchasers were going to do with her. Finally, they reached a large Indian settlement where someone could speak English. She describes the news of her status like this.
Here my anxiety was put forever to rest. I learned that my purchasers were acting under instructions from the U.S. Indian agent, and that the long journey, with its perils and sacrifices, had been all made for me. All my fears from them were groundless, as they were really my friends. How often it is thus in life we do not know our friends from our enemies. To understand the scope of Abbie's travels, we are going to insert this map. Her travel from being taken captive to being ransomed would have been solely by foot, often carrying a heavy pack.
It was sensational news of the time. Abbie was going to be reunited with her surviving sister, who had been away visiting at the time of the massacre. She then found a young man and was married, and they had children. In her book, she talks of suffering, both physical and mental, for many years. No doubt she suffered some post-traumatic stress from her ordeal. Abbie described her state immediately prior to her rescue and afterwards like this.
Hope gone. My vitality and energy exhausted. I was bruised, sore, and lame in every part of my body. It seemed impossible for me to get rested. Although 28 years have passed since then, I have not recovered from the fearful strain upon my physical and nervous system. Later in life, she would have the opportunity to purchase the property that her family had lived on and died on. And at that time, the cabin was still standing. She was also able to create a monument where her family was buried. After she bought the cabin, she fixed up the cabin and operated it as a tourist site for many years. Let's take a look at what the cabin looks like inside now.
It is hard to imagine that the 6 members family lived here, along with her sister, husband, and 2 babies as well. It's almost unimaginable, but of course people lived like that in these cabins back then.
She also worked with the state of Iowa to have a memorial erected as a reminder of this horrific event. It seemed as if she worked the remainder of her life to give voice not only to the suffering of this event, but also to the endurance and resilience that is reflected in her experience. And finally, to reconciliation. Abbie Gardner Sharp died in 1921 and is buried with her family and her 2 children beside the lake at Okoboji.
This would not end the strife between the Native Americans, the U.S. government, and the settlers. A few years later, tensions would boil over and resulted in the U.S. Dakota War of 1862, which took place mainly in the state of Minnesota. But that, my friends, is a story for another time.
Today, Spirit Lake and the lakes of Okoboji are a quiet resort focused on summer fun. You'd never guess the bloodshed that once happened here. But remembering events like Abbie Gardner's help us to reflect on not just history, but on how mankind treats each other then and now.
Thanks for joining us for this journey into the past. If you're ever in Northwest Iowa, please make sure that you stop and see the Abbie Gardner Cabin. It's more than just a historical site. It is a story of survival that still echoes today.
We are part-time travelers doing a variety of trips, from cruises to road trips to someplace local to someplace international. Because we have a lot of different topics we cover on this channel, we are organizing the different trips or types of travel into playlists. We have started a Midwest Traveler playlist where we will put our videos on topics about traveling around the Midwest of this United States. You may also want to check out our other playlists. We have quite a few videos on a playlist of our cruise to Panama Canal in Central America. We have a playlist on St. Simon's Island in Georgia, and a short playlist for now on doing ancestry travel. Please check those out and see if you find anything interesting amongst that group of videos.
If you've enjoyed this video, please give us a like and subscribe, and click on notifications so you will know when our newest videos are released. As always, we would love to hear your comments, and you can leave those below. And until next time, we say goodbye.
Goodbye.